Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This show is brought to you by Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell. If you've been looking for a programming laptop, but you're not sure which one to buy or how to set it up, especially if you want to program multiple brands. You know, you've got some domestic vehicles, you've got European vehicles. Can the same software go on the same laptop? What size hard drive do I need? All those questions. Isaac's your guy. He can custom set up programming laptops that are ready to tackle any make or model. I got one of these laptops myself, and I can say that it is outstanding, and it really streamlines the process by having everything you need in one device. So if you're looking for something like that, I highly recommend checking out autorescuetools.com. You'll also find scan tools, diagnostic equipment, key cutting equipment, and much more. Check out the link in the show notes. I highly recommend it. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. You got just me this week. We did put out a poll into the Facebook group, which you can still go on to. Follow the link in the show notes to voice your opinion on what you'd like to hear about or who you'd like to hear from. Tommy and I. The number one thing, however, was technical case studies, technical information. Of course, this is the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast, and as promised, I will be tossing these in here, and Tommy and I might do a few of them together, but for today, you got just me, and I'm going to share one of the many parasitic draw case studies that I've been dealing with lately. I seem to get a lot of these. They are challenging, time-consuming, frustrating at times, which is why we get called on them a lot. But having a process can get you through these. I do teach a class on parasitic draws, but there's no shortage of them, and a lot of the times they end up being unique in one way or another. This one had some twists and turns to it, and some important points that I thought were worthwhile bringing up, right? I'll share the case study because it's interesting, and maybe you run into it and you see the similar problem, but there are a couple pieces within there that I think are applicable to multiple vehicles and multiple parasitic draws as far as how you want to approach the problem and what things you're going to be up against. So anyways, what we're dealing with here is a 2017 Buick Lacrosse. This had a parasitic draw that would kill the battery after a day or two. The shop was having difficulty identifying the draw or even identifying that it was present. Did seem to be intermittent in nature, although they weren't sure. They're like, maybe we're not checking it correctly. Pretty competent shop, but they were having some challenges, even getting to the point of like, what is the draw in the battery? So that's where we got called in. There is also a YouTube version of this if you want to check it out. I will do my best, as always, to describe everything audio only, so you don't need the visual. But if you want some diagrams and a little bit of extra, I have some pictures of scope captures and stuff on this one. You can check out the video. Maybe you're already watching it. But anyways, let's get into this. We initially went to check this one out after they called us in, and we found the same thing that the shop was experiencing, that we did not have a higher than normal draw. Now, I say that, but it was roughly about 90 to 100 milliamps, which is just a little bit higher than what I would expect. I want this thing down closer to 50. It was up towards 100 milliamps. That was the lowest it would go, but it got there, I would say, within 10 minutes, and it stayed there. Now, they were pretty adamant, and the battery had been replaced, but they were pretty adamant that this thing will die like overnight, although it's not every night, okay? But we weren't sure if 100 milliamps was going to be the reason that that would happen. Now, is 100 milliamps going to kill a battery eventually? Yeah. Is it going to take a few days on a new battery, which this one has? Yes, this is going to take a while. So we weren't sure if we're going to go after this 100 milliamp draw. Right. Could I find what's causing that draw? For sure. Is that going to be the cause? We're not quite sure. An overnight, the battery to die overnight on a new battery, I'm just not totally convinced that 100 milliamp draw will do that. And they said it doesn't die every night, right? They can leave it sometimes and it's fine and it doesn't kill the battery. So what I'm wondering if there is a larger draw at play. Now, could you find that 100 milliamp and maybe that, is related to it? It's definitely possible, but I spent about a half hour on this thing watching it to see if anything would happen, and it stayed right around there. So I said, hey, get this to our shop and we'll monitor it over a long period of time and we'll see what actually happens to this thing once the battery dies. I just want to know, is there something else coming awake? Is there a bigger draw that's happening? And then we can assess the whole thing. And what I found, having a shop, and for you guys that work in a shop, this isn't really a concern, but doing mobile stuff, parasitic draws, especially intermittent parasitic draws, terrible to do out in the field mobile. Just, it's extremely time consuming and really just not even possible. But if you have a shop that you can set up at, you can monitor a vehicle long term. And you could do this a few different ways. If you look at the picture, I'm using some battery powered amp clamps. That's not the best for long term. If you want to sit there for a specific period of time, use your battery powered amp clamps, that works. There's a little bit of drift over time and the batteries will die, obviously. If you have the Pico A where you can power up the lead through the scope, you could potentially let it sit for longer. You could also do a shunt in line from the battery and measure the voltage drop across that. That's the best way if you're going to do a real extended long-term battery draw monitor using a scope, and you can set up a trigger there and figure out what the draw is. That's an option. The other thing that we'll do is I'll put the leads just on the battery voltage in general, just to see what's the voltage, down to the 10th or the 100th of the volt, and see, is there any drop, right? Does this drop 0.4 of a volt overnight? Does it stay exactly where it's at? With a normal, 50 milliamp draw, you should be able to leave the vehicle overnight and it won't even drop 1/10 of a volt on a adequate battery. But the other thing I'll do, especially with an intermittent draw, because this usually ends up being modules that wake up, talk on a network, is I'll connect to the network on the vehicle with the other leads of the scope, right? And we want to look at body cans a lot of the time, because those are the modules that have the ability to wake up and talk without a key on activation normally, right? What I mean by that is you don't need to turn the key on for a specific set of modules on your car to be able to wake up and talk on a network. And that's normal, but they need some sort of trigger, right? You open the door, you hit the button on the key, whatever it might be, maybe a button on the dash. That wakes up a module, but it doesn't need the key to be on in order to do that, okay? Those modules and that network, whatever they're on, it's usually some sort of body can, interior can, whatever it might be, they are the most susceptible to being able to wake up and talk, stay awake, drain a battery. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't happen on a high-speed powertrain can. It could, but a lot of those modules will need some sort of wake up or power feed in order to turn on and start talking. And that could happen. But again, I'm looking at what's the most likely scenario. Now, depending on the construction of the vehicle and how many networks and where I can tie in, we'll decide what I'm going to connect to. And we can also look at the pre-scan and see if there's any hints there. Spoiler alert, I didn't pay attention closely enough to the pre-scan on this one, and we'll talk about that later, but the pre-scans are really important because they can clue you into what's going on with a parasitic draw. Look for communication codes. Look for, really anything could be a clue, but you have to determine, okay, is that component related? Could it cause a draw? How do I check for that? anyways, pre-scan, I really strongly recommend you do that before you jump into one of these things, especially if you're going to use a method where you're disconnecting the battery in order to hook up your equipment. You really want to do your pre-scan before you jump into that. Anyways, what we do with the laptop in this situation, I've done for a few vehicles, is we connect it to wherever we want on the vehicle, however we decide monitoring the draw is going to be appropriate for this particular application. And then we connect it to Wi-Fi in the shop and plug in the laptop, get the scope running, set up the triggers, and then we're able to remote into the laptop and check it from wherever we're at. I can do it throughout the day as I'm working on other vehicles. I can check in at night at home. I'm watching TV. Oh, let me open the remote application and see, okay, is what's going on here. I can operate the scope. If I've set up my trigger, right, it'll capture, what network woke up. I can monitor the voltage to see if it's dropped. However, I have it set up. So that's been really successful for me to be able to take on these intermittent draws and not have to sit there for hours on end. It's just set it up, get the remote application, and you're good to go. And there's a few different ones out there. We use AnyDesk, but there's TeamViewer and UltraViewer, and I'm sure there's others out there too. Anyways, we do this. I leave it set overnight for the first night at our shop, and nothing. We're still at that like 80 to 90 milliamp draw, and I'm debating, okay, well, maybe I'll just chase that and see what that ends up with. When I come in the next morning and I start looking at the vehicle, I actually did have the draw occur. Now, I've got the key away from the vehicle. I've got the vehicle set up for a draw, and I did that the night before, and I didn't disrupt anything when I got there. But the draw did occur. And setting up the vehicle is important. The state the vehicle is in is important. I had a Kia recently where it would only the draw would only occur when you locked the vehicle, right? And it had something to do with arming the anti-theft portion of that vehicle. But if it was unlocked, it would not draw. And so the state of the vehicle does matter. And we had played around with this one, locking, unlocking, to see if that triggered it, and it didn't really. And I wasn't really sure what triggered it, but as you can see in the picture, I got about 330 milliamps coming off the negative terminal of the battery. And in the picture, I'm just using the Unity amp clamp, fits around the battery cable. I'm just trying to assess what is the overall draw from this battery. And 330 milliamps, okay, now we're talking this could potentially kill a battery overnight or over the course of, a day and a half, 2 days. This is definitely something that I can find this, I can address this. This is a problem because this thing's been sitting overnight, not touched. All the switches are in the correct position, and the battery's in the trunk on this one just for reference, but you can see I've got about 330 milliamps. So, okay, let's start chasing this. Now, I was not looking at the network activity at this point on this one. I actually don't have my scope connected if you're following along with the pictures, but I have the draw. So what I decided in this point, because I didn't know how long this was going to last, I was going to try to get some direction and see where is this draw going. And on top of the battery is a fuse assembly. This fuse assembly has several different cables going off of it. So there's a positive terminal on the battery, obviously, and this thing bolts to the positive terminal, and then off of that, it has these big flat fuses, like 100 amp and 40 amp fuses that plug into cables that go to the rest of the vehicle. Now, there's a big red cable that goes up to the starter under the hood. That's not where the draw was, but these smaller cables, I just moved my amp clamp down the line for the 5 different cables that were there, 4 or 5 of them. And then I found the one that matched almost the entire draw of the vehicle, that 300 some milliamps. It's just 360 in this picture. One thing about that Unity amp clamp is you get down into the tens of milliamps, and there's some variance. You can turn the meter and see it shift a little bit. But again, that 300 is what I'm looking at. Like, that's the problem. That's what I'm going to find. And these clamps do a great job for that. I would say if the draw is big enough to cause a problem for the system, these clamps will measure it. That's what I can say about their accuracy. But anyways, I find the one that has the draw. Okay, cool. I just need to figure out where does that go. That's my next step. And again, I'm kind of moving along here just to see, like, can I catch this and get some direction before it stops, because I don't know when it will stop. I'm going to have some diagrams on the video. These are courtesy of All Data, not sponsored by All Data. I like to use them. They gave me permission to use the diagrams in these case studies. I use Identifix too. And quite honestly, in this one, Identifix, the organization, trying to find diagrams and related to the components was a little bit more helpful, but I'll get more into that. This wasn't the easiest thing to figure out the wiring, which is why I'm talking about this. So what you see next in the diagram is just an overhead picture of that fuse assembly that's bolted to the positive terminal. And I have highlighted the one where my draw is. It's labeled as number 8 in the picture. It was a letter on the component, which made it a little bit more confusing. But the color is there, and you can tell, okay, it's this one. And if you look at the description of this fuse assembly on the battery, you can see that number 8, which is the one that I've highlighted, which is the one that has the draw of 300 some milliamps, goes to different things depending on the RPO code of the vehicle. So it could be the T19 power supply transformer. It might not be used, or it could go to the power steering control module. You need to determine which one it is based off of the RPO code. LFV, LGX, LKN, or LTG. There's a bunch of options there. And let me tell you, if you're working on a modern GM vehicle, you're going through wiring diagrams, just pull up your RPO codes and have a way that you can Control F and type in the RPO code that you are searching for or wondering if it has. That is the quickest way to navigate through GM diagrams. Like, try doing a Chevy Silverado headlight turn signal assembly without utilizing the RPO codes or having them in front of you. It's an enormous waste of time. And we're finding that on all kinds of stuff on GM is navigating through those diagrams. You need the RPO codes and a quick way to reference them. Anyways, this show is brought to you by Automotive Seminars. If you're looking to stay up on the cutting edge diagnostic strategies and techniques, this is the place. You've got live 4-hour seminars that are put online that you can join in, ask questions, interact with the instructors with some of the best of the best. They've got Keith Perkins and John Thornton putting on classes like network diagnostics, mechanical engine testing, advanced electrical testing, and GDI diagnostics, and a ton more. And once you purchase one of these training seminars, you can access this at any time that you want through your account at automotiveseminars.com. You can rewatch the training a year, 2 years later, which makes this training even more valuable. So I highly recommend you check this out. The link is in the show notes. Quick way to reference them. Anyways, on this one, what I find out is it does have the power supply transformer. And there's actually 2 circuits that go to that here off of this fuse box. But the number 8 in question that has the draw, it goes to the T19 power supply transformer. If you look at the diagram, which actually, if you're not paying attention to the RPO codes, it's a little confusing because it has 2 number 8s coming out of it. But if you look up at the top of the diagram, okay, RPO codes, that's why there's 2 different ones. It does change the size of the fuse too. So that can be, a little bit disorienting if you're not paying attention to what's going on. But using the RPO codes, and the KL9 is actually the one that this one has, that's a auto stop start, goes to this T19 power supply transformer. Now, here's where things get a little tricky, because at first I'm not 100% sure what this power supply transformer does, but finding it within the diagrams is not the easiest thing in the world. Now, if you're familiar with diagrams, you look at a component on a diagram and it has a dotted line around it. It means the wires that you see on that particular diagram are not all of the wires that go to that component. If it's a solid line, that's all of them. I could not find a diagram that was a solid line for this component, meaning I don't have a single diagram that shows me all of the circuits going into this component, which I'd like to know, okay, what is this thing used for? What are all the circuits going to it? Maybe I have to use separate diagrams, but that makes things a little bit trickier, especially when I'm not super familiar with what the component does. But let's start there. What is the power supply transformer for this 17 Lacrosse? The DC to DC, and this is straight out of service information, the DC to DC converter monitors battery voltage and will maintain operating voltage to the radio, instrument cluster, and instrument panel displays. The DC to DC converter will provide a boosted voltage to sensitive loads during auto start to ensure proper operation of the driver informational displays. So really what this is stabilizing the customer or the driver facing components electrically when it goes to perform an auto start, right? You've come to a stop. It met all the criteria to shut down the engine, to save fuel. You've released the brake pedal. Now you're going to get going and it's going to crank the engine. That's a big draw on the main battery, lowers voltage when that starter hits and you have that big amperage spike. This is boosting voltage. This component, this power supply transformer, it's boosting voltage to a number of interior electrical components so that they are not affected by that voltage drop of the main battery from the starter. Now, we've seen other auto stop vehicles use an auxiliary battery for this, and they'll switch what components are connected to. But I'm seeing more and more vehicles use some sort of boost capacitor or something like that in order to boost the voltage. This is one of them. This does make this a little bit trickier if you're going to try to follow an amperage path through a vehicle. And I talked to the technician that was working on this at the shop, and this is kind of where he got threw off too, because he's like, I found that it was this component, but I'm not sure if the component is the draw or if it's something that's fed off of this component, because I don't really know what's connected to it. And I agree, it wasn't easy to find this within the diagrams. Now, where is this component on the vehicle? There's a picture of it here. It's under the center console, so also not the easiest thing to get to in the world. You can actually pull HVAC duct out and get your hand in there to the connector, but still not super easy to get to. So I have to weigh whether it's worthwhile for me to really access this component, or can I tell through diagrams how this thing interacts with the rest of the electrical system, right? Because I'm thinking there's power going into this, right? And I haven't measured on this cable that it's going to this component. But if this is meant to feed electrical components in the car, is this just a pass-through, essentially, where the components on the other end are what's actually drawing and it's just going through this component? It's possible. And if that's the case and I unplug it, of course the draw is going to go away, but it might not be that component. So I should really understand what's going on, how this is wired up into the vehicle before I waste my time even accessing it. And again, that's where it got tricky. That's where the shop kind of got hung up. Now, I mentioned I couldn't find a diagram with like all of the wires going to this. And I run into that sometimes with modules, depending on the brand. And what I might do in that situation that's kind of helped me out when I can't get a full picture of everything that's connected to the module and all the circuits, because I don't want to miss anything, right? Like, this is a different scenario, but let's say I want to know all of the powers and grounds to a module, but there's no single diagram with all of the circuits. Every diagram I find has a dotted line around it. You run into that situation every once in a while. What you can do is go to the pinout for that component, and you should have all of your circuits right there on the pinout. Now, it's not a diagram, but you can go through them, and there's a description, or it says function for each circuit, and say, what is this, okay? And there's 18 pins on this power supply transformer. And you can, look at the gauge and the color, but also the description. Now, we've got a couple grounds. We've got ignition voltage, a wake up, 4 CAN lines to it, but then we all, and a positive battery voltage on 2 wires. Pins 8 and 11 are the feed from the battery fuse box, and you can actually see that on the power distribution diagrams. Pin 8 and 11 feed power in from these large 40 amp fuses at the battery. Okay, but what about out? That's really what I'm concerned about, and I've got 2 circuits out. Pins 9 and 10, we've got 12 volt regulated supply voltage 1 and 2. Okay, so looking at the pin out, to me, it looks like I've got 2 in and 2 out as far as the pass through going to the rest of the electrical system. And that's what I want to find within the diagram. Okay. Now, again, could this component be the thing that's drawing the current? Maybe, but I want to know where these are going before I jump in and start tearing apart the center console on this thing. And this is where I really had to kind of scour through the diagrams. Again, Identifix search function worked a little better for this than AllData, and I'd encourage you, if you have the capability, use multiple service information if you can, because I can't tell you how many times I've run into a roadblock with one service information or another, and the other one works better or with less resistance. And that it wasn't that these diagrams weren't in AllData, it was just easier to find what I was looking for within Identifix. For this example, there's examples where it's the other way around. I mean, if you're working on most new stuff, AllData is the way to go, as opposed to Identifix. They suck with new stuff, and that's just the way it is. But sometimes I like the search function within Identifix is how it arranges things. Anyways, those 2 supply wires out, going out to the rest of the vehicle from this power supply transformer, this is what I want to find. I find this on 2 diagrams. And once again, you got to pay attention to the RPO codes. The other thing I would note is this power supply transformer. It's kind of in the middle of the diagram, where when I'm looking for power supplies on GM, like the source of power, I generally look up towards the top of the diagram because that's generally how they're laid out in a power distribution. This one's kind of in the middle. It threw me off. The diagram that I have up, I missed that the power supply transformer was here until I searched for it the correct way. But it is here. And again, you have to pay attention to the RPO codes. Otherwise, the path of power into the instrument panel fuse block takes a completely different route. But there's our power supply transformer, there's our RPO code, and it actually directs us to go to another diagram, which is the next one up here. And it's one of those things where it says F on diagram blank. That's right here. Oh, and hey, here's the power supply transformer with my other pin 9. So, and if you're listening, we've got the 2 pins, 9 and 10, which are out going to the rest of the vehicle. Here's 10, here's 9. Those are our 2 circuits. So what it looks like is we feed the body control module, the transmission control module, and this is through fuses in the instrument panel fuse block. But what is nice is both of these wires that go out of this thing go to the instrument panel fuse block. So I'm kind of narrowing in on one component, which is nice. Chassis control, OnStar, instrument cluster, heads-up display, HVAC, infotainment, info display, video display. Those are all on a bank of fuses, and there's one more that it has you go to. Now, I think this diagram is actually labeled wrong. It says 7 on the diagram to go to a next diagram, and it lists the fuse that it connects to. But if you go to that, and I did check RPOs and application, it shows it as F. But that's the fuse, that F40, that's where it goes. And I believe this is accurate. So one more diagram. We have all of our ADAS components, and then we also have the BCM, the radio, the human machine interface, and the auxiliary audio input. So we have a series of things that this feeds, and it makes sense because it's powering up the interior of the vehicle, you could say, during a stop-start event. But our current probably is going to be going to one of these components. Again, could be the power supply transformer. But what's easier for me at this point? Do I pull apart the center console and try to access this thing, or do I go to these fuses and start checking them? That's what I'm doing, right? I have an amp hound. I can measure voltage drop across fuses. I've only got a total of 8 of them that I need to check based on these diagrams. Now, again, it wasn't exactly a simple thing to deduct this from the diagrams, and I'll be better prepared next time, but that's kind of why I'm talking about this, because this power supply transformer really kind of throws things off. And if you're not paying attention to the diagrams, you don't understand the RPO codes or what component could or could not be there, boy, you're lost. And I think that's where this technician was too, is struggling a little bit with it. But I did too, until I sorted it out. I'm like, okay, I think this is how this is set up. I'm just going to check these fuses while the draw is still present and see, okay, do I have activity, or do I have a draw on any of them? Do I have voltage drop across these fuses indicating current draw? And it turns out that I do. Fuse F40, which is a 10 amp, and that instrument panel fuse block has almost all of my draw. Okay, the 300 milliamps or so that I'm looking for, it's there. Okay, awesome. I'm really narrowing in here because Fuse 40 feeds all of the ADAS components. I don't know if all of them, but all of the components that it feeds are driver assistance systems. So you have parking assist, active safety control, front view camera, long range radar, and both the side object detection modules. There's 2 of them in the back, and that's where my head's going immediately, because we have so many issues with these side object detection modules on GMs. They get all full of corrosion and cause all kinds of problems. And that's what I'm thinking on this thing immediately is, okay, I've got a side object detection issue. So, what I can do at this point is I can go to these modules, unplug them one by one. I do have a splice pack here I could potentially go for. I do have more RPO codes that I have to pay attention to see, okay, what's actually equipped on this vehicle. But what I actually did here, because then I was like, oh, I kind of negated my network once I noticed the draw was present, right? I mentioned before I was monitoring network for network operation. I'm like, well, let's see, because I had looked at what networks were present on this vehicle, and one of them was an object detection bus. Okay, so this is an ADAS bus, if you will, and that's pins 3 and 11 at the DLC. That's literally right in front of my face where I am at the vehicle. And I have my U-scope out. I'm like, well, let's just see. During the draw, vehicle's off, keys away. We've got a 300 milliamp draw on this fuse that feeds ADAS components, and I do have network activity. And you can see that. Now, it looks to me like a repeating message. So is this just one module talking? Is it keeping everybody else awake? I think so, but there's activity. So here's what's cool, because now I can use the network as my trigger as to whether it's happening or not. I could use the draw too, but the network's like something right in front of my face that I can scope and look at, manipulate things and see, okay, when does that drop, right? And I can separate the network at places and see how that affects it. That's a really good indicator for me to say, yep, there's my guy that's talking. Let's get him to stop. And once he does, then we'll double check that the draw is gone. Okay. Now, looking at my object bus, because I'm like, well, it has to be a control module that's on there. I look at this, and I have an active safety control module, a front view camera, and a long-range radar. So of those several modules that I mentioned were powered up by this fuse, where the draw was going, I have only 3 of them actually on this object bus. So now I've narrowed this down even further, and I did verify that these are all equipped on this particular vehicle. So now I just need to decide where to go. This is a CAN bus. It is like an in through out setup, which the active safety control module, it goes in, it goes out, and then it goes back in. And the active safety control has a terminating resistor. The long range radar has a terminating resistor. And then the camera is just a sort of an in through out. But now I just need to decide, okay, I'm going to go unplug one of these 3 modules and see what happens. Which one's the easiest? Front view camera. it's right there. Like I can just reach up, pull the plastic panel down, and unplug the camera and see what happens. Now, again, I need to realize that it is like I have two sides of the network once I unplug this camera. So depending on what happens, and I'm tied in at my DLC, then that will direct me as to, okay, where do I go next with this? And I can use the scope and figure out, okay, what side of the network has activity. But I found something interesting when I got to this camera. If you watch this video that is on the PowerPoint here, as soon as I touched the connector, I didn't even unplug it, I touched the connector at the camera, the activity would drop in and out. And you could see that I'm just wiggling it, and you could see the bus, which I'm tied in at the DLC right here, and I'm touching this connector and I drop activity. So what's going on there? I have a pin fitment issue at this camera, and I believe this is why the full amount of draw that killed the battery overnight was intermittent. Okay, now we still had that like almost 100 milliamps, and I think that was coming from the module that was talking. But when the whole network was connected, all three of these modules were talking and caused a collective 300 some milliamp draw. So now, okay, well, number one, there's an issue with the pin fitment. I need to fix that. But I can use the connector at the camera to figure out, well, what side is the activity coming from? And I can almost be assured, if you're looking at the diagram, because my scope's at the DLC and disrupting this connector, it's either the camera itself or the long range radar. And what I did was I unplugged the camera and I checked both sides. And with the camera unplugged, there is activity on the bus coming from the radar sensor, which is up front behind the grill. So my radar is the one that is talking all the time when the key is off. And when the network's connected, that talking wakes up the camera and the active safety module. So we have a bigger draw on the system. Now, again, I think that radar module itself was somewhat of a draw and eventually killed the battery. But then when you got all three modules on this bus active, then it would pull that battery voltage down even quicker. So I went up to the front radar module, and I have a picture of the scope pattern when the network was open on the screen here. If you see your bias voltage is where you want it, about 2.5, you see on one side of the bus a message go down and then a message go up from the bias voltage point. That's a real good indicator that you have an open somewhere in that network. Even with this, this waveform on the U-scope with not a lot of clarity, if I see this is open network to me, like almost immediately. And these networks, you can ohm check them and tell that real quick too. But this is an indicator like, hey, I got an open, I need to find it. I just wanted to show this when I would wiggle that camera connector, you could see it on the network. But I also wanted to bring up something else. This kind of came full circle to me. I'm like, well, hang on a second. If this network was open, shouldn't I have seen some of this stuff on my pre-scan? And it was there. There were codes for communication on the object bus that I overlooked. I didn't grasp onto that, and I missed that. That's just, hey, stuff happens. You miss stuff sometimes. You don't in the moment. Maybe you're busy. Maybe I'm answering some phone calls. Maybe I'm just not, thinking the way that I should, messing up my own process, but that happens. And it's just something that I wanted to point out, right? The things that the parasitic draw part of it's cool. It ended up being a radar assembly. We replaced it, calibrated it. It fixed the draw all the way down to 50 milliamps. But I wanted to bring up the power supply transformer and the path through the power distribution that takes. That's important to note. And I wanted to just reiterate, like I have before, really pay attention to the pre-scan on these things. It makes a huge difference in getting to the problem quicker when you pay attention what's on there. If you see communication codes that are hard faults, even if they're not, note it, write it down, say, hey, this might be something I want to look at, but if it's a hard fault, okay, let's look at this thing. Let's find it. But in conclusion on this one, the intermittent nature of the draw was the pin fitment issue at the camera, and the actual component that was staying awake causing the draw at various levels, depending on the connection at the camera, was the front radar assembly. We replaced that, calibrated, all good to go. So that's what I got for you today on this case study. Hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully you learned something from that, and it helps you get through a vehicle like this in the future. But I'd like to thank everybody for listening and all the positive feedback on the show. Remember, go check out that poll. It's still live in the group. You can make your suggestion on what you want to hear about or who you want to hear from. But other than that, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.